Welcome everyone to your official SummerSlam preview show right here on Sportskeeda. I am Korey Gunz, host of the Drop Hit Discussions podcast, and with me for this preview is my partner in crime, as usual, wrestling expert Tom Colohue. Tom, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a really good card in contrast to a lot of things. I know it's a lot of rematches and stuff, but I, for one, I'm quite excited for it.
Yeah, well, we're going to run down the card, give each other our predictions, talk about some interesting things going into each match, and just kind of see how we see the event shaping up on Sunday. So we'll start with the hair versus hair match, which is going to be Mandy Rose against Sonya Deville. I'll start with this one. I think Mandy Rose is coming out on top here. I think Sonya Deville can definitely rock the bald look. I'm not so sure Mandy Rose could pull it off quite as well. So I'm going to take Sonya in this one. What say you?
Well, I think Mandy Rose has already had one haircut and she looks pretty good. I think a second haircut would just be confusing at this stage. Let's have Sonya Deville. As you say, she can definitely rock the bald look. She looks awesome in a suit. And to be fair, Mandy Rose has had all the losses so far. Let's have her having a win. Let's have her chasing Bayley's championship. Sonya Deville, even in losing, will look even more intense and deadly. So I think it's only right that Mandy Rose takes this one.
Now, we've talked about before that the women's division on SmackDown seems a little bit thin. Case in point, we're going to talk about here in a minute, but Asuka is fighting both the Raw and the women's champion on this show. Do you think if Sonya kind of takes one for the team here and gets a haircut that maybe the WWE could reward her with a little bit of a push in the women's division over on SmackDown?
Definitely. I think Mandy and Sonya have been kept separate from everyone. They've been building and building and building to a point now where they are almost on the level of championship already. Give Mandy Rose the championship, then let's get back to this feud with Sonya potentially taking it away from her.
Well, let's talk about the other women's matches on the card. Asuka's going to be pulling double duty. Let's talk first about her SmackDown Women's Championship match with Bayley at SummerSlam. Tom?
I get it, man. It's hard to keep up sometimes because they're always appearing together. They've always got all the championships. It's hard. But one thing that has to be remembered, and I think this is a key part here, if they've been announced to be wrestling a payback for the tag team championships with no storyline going into it, there is a very high chance they are losing those championships, which means any championship they hold, that's where they're ending up. They are both technically on SmackDown, but if Sasha Banks stays the Raw champion, she's likely to separate and be on Raw. With Bayley, I don't think there are any other top level faces outside of, for example, Mandy Rose. So if you have Asuka move over, you end up with too many heels at top at the other side, and you end up with Bayley confused as to where she lands. For me, this is cut and dry. Bayley keeps the championship, stays on top of SmackDown, walking into the championship with Mandy Rose. Asuka stays on Raw where she is very much needed.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think Bayley's going to retain here. I think with the angle that they seem to be going for, you got to think that we're eventually going to get to this big crescendo of finally getting Bayley versus Sasha Banks. And I think that when that happens, it's going to end up being for the SmackDown Women's Championship, with Sasha maybe kind of finally taking over that mantle from Bayley as the SmackDown Women's Champion and then moving on from there. So I agree with you. I think Bayley's going to retain here, maybe with some help from Sasha Banks. Now let's move on then to the second part of the doubleheader, Asuka versus Sasha Banks. How do you see this one going? Do you think that the fact that we're maybe moving towards a Sasha-Bayley feud has anything on the way that this match goes? In my opinion, I'll go ahead and tell you, I think that it's very possible that Asuka wins the Raw Women's Championship here, and I think it's going to be from some miscue by Bayley trying to help Sasha, doesn't go the right way, ends up costing Sasha the match, and maybe that's just another part of this storyline between Banks and Bayley moving forward. So I've got Asuka in this one taking back the Raw Championship. What do you think?
For me, I think that is much more likely than it is for the SmackDown Women's Championship, particularly as regards if they are moving permanently back to SmackDown, they'll need to get that championship off Sasha Banks. But I do feel like every week for the last 2 years or so, someone has told me, oh, this is the beginning of Sasha Banks versus Bayley. This is the beginning of it. This is the beginning. You just watch. This is the beginning. And it never seems to happen. If they want that match, she should keep the championship and they should have a feud at Survivor Series, and the build to that, they can have that breakup. But personally, and I know I'm in the minority here, but personally, I see Asuka losing both matches and I see Sasha Banks retaining the Raw Women's Championship.
If Asuka goes 0 for 2 here, what does that do to her as a character? I mean, she's coming off, she was the Raw Women's Champion. You thought she was going to get the super push with Becky Lynch on the shelf. If she goes, like I said, 0 for 2, where do they go from here with her?
Asuka was never the one meant for the super push. The fact that Becky became unavailable meant they had to very quickly turn Asuka face. She was never originally meant to be in that position. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that she's going to get thrown down the card, but I feel Sasha Banks versus Shayna Baszler is what's coming next. And I think Asuka now doing double duty is maybe the end of the significant push, but we'll still see her pushed. That's just how I feel about it. It could very easily go the other way. But for me, the best thing to do here is to separate Sasha Banks and Bayley without immediately going into feud.
Let me ask your opinion on this before we move on. You know, you mentioned that it seems like it's been forever that we've been hearing about, oh, we're going to get the Bayley-Sasha feud. We're going to get the Bayley-Sasha feud. Are we kind of nearing critical mass here where if they don't finally pull the trigger on this soon, whether it's at SummerSlam or at least in the next month or so, that fans are going to kind of get burned out on it and be like, you know what, I don't even want to see it anymore. You know, like, so if the WWE is going to go with it, they need to go with it soon.
I think critical mass was about 1.5 years ago. I honestly do. I feel at this point it can't live up to the NXT TakeOver match. It's not possible. They don't have the same arena. They won't have the same time. They won't have the same match stipulation. Lightning doesn't necessarily strike twice. I think we should be very happy with the feud we had, but I feel at this point it'll be similar to Miz versus Daniel Bryan. Any feud you make happen between these two cannot live up to the massive expectation of fans. I wish they'd have got it out the way already. We'd have had a great match. It would have been a coming of age moment for Bayley, but instead Bayley has had a different coming of age moment. She is risen now, in my opinion, above Sasha Banks. So we will see how it comes out. But for me, I think a lot of people who won that match would be very disappointed if Bayley won. And that's just how I feel on it. I think critical mass was a long time ago.
Let's move on now to the United States Championship match. It's going to be Apollo Crews defending the championship against MVP. I tell you, and we talked about this on the podcast just this past week, I was a little bit surprised to see MVP in this spot. I thought that at this point, maybe they would slide Bobby Lashley in there. And if that was the case, I would probably be picking Bobby Lashley to come out of here as the champion. But being as it is with MVP there, take Apollo Crews. And that may be an upset pick, but I think that since they didn't have Apollo Crews drop the U.S. title before now, I think that that's a sign that maybe they're going to give him a chance and they're going to run with him for a little bit. And I think there's some bigger things on the horizon for the Hurt Business, bigger than the U.S. Championship. So I'm going to take Apollo Crews here. Who's your pick?
For me, I'd take Apollo Crews as well. I did expect we'd see Bobby Lashley in this spot already, but apparently we didn't. MVP's been getting rave reviews backstage. He's got the new deal now. And really, it seems like it's becoming increasingly difficult to just push Bobby Lashley, which was the whole plan here. I do think this new championship was made for Bobby Lashley. I think it'll be a long time before he's going towards WWE Championship. He's already lost to Drew. If Orton wins, then it's heel versus heel. So I think there isn't much higher he can actually go right now with the layout in the landscape as it is. So I think right now, Bobby Lashley, the United States champion, will be very, very good and very worth the time taken. It'd be great for a long-term feud with Kevin Owens. and great for a long-term feud with Dominik Mysterio, Rey Mysterio. There are a lot of people he could work with right now and elevate.
Now, there were thoughts or rumors going into SummerSlam that maybe one match they might go with would be Bobby Lashley against Brock Lesnar. And that's a match that Lashley himself has said that he's really looking forward to and has really been pushing for. That was one of the reasons why he came back to the WWE. Do you think that if Lashley isn't maybe given the U.S. Championship or given some type of important storyline here soon, that maybe he's going to get a little bit sick and tired of waiting around for the WWE to kind of fulfill some of the promises they may have made him on this latest run?
I think that's very possible, and I think that's very likely. There's a reason he's talking about the match with Brock Lesnar so much right now. As the days wind down and his contract slowly comes towards its end, he is getting more and more vocal about this match. I do know they discussed it. They wanted this match. Bobby said this himself in negotiations. He wants this match. So certainly we have to see it happen eventually. And I've got to say, what better advertisement is there for the United States Championship than Bobby Lashley versus Brock Lesnar?
Let's move now to the Tag Team Championship scene, the Raw Tag Team Championship specifically. It's going to be the Street Profits defending against Andrade and Garza. Again, I think it's going to be a great match in the ring. I'm not super excited about this just because I feel like it was just a couple months ago that we saw these two teams going at it, and we saw every combination, every which way on Raw for almost a month, it seemed. We were always getting some type of combination of the Street Profits and Garza and Andrade. I've got the Street Profits retaining here. Maybe a little bit of dissension going on in the Vegas stable. I'm not really sold on either one of these guys, Garza and Andrade, as a babyface. So I'm not really sure how that's going to play out if they decide to actually dissolve this team. But I think it's going to be fine in the ring. It's just not a match that I'm necessarily excited about seeing. I think the Street Profits are going to retain. What do you think? How do you feel about this match?
Well, as you've said there, Raw is broken into a lot of divisions right now, and we're seeing every possible combination match. Everything that's happening around the Monday Night Messiah, we've seen every possible combination already. We've seen Kevin Owens floating from division to division to division. He was even involved with Ruby Riott, Liv Morgan, and the Iconics, who've been in division of their own for the past 10 weeks in constant combinations. They need to break that out. One of the reasons I'm really excited for SummerSlam is it looks like a lot of these storylines are coming to an end. This, however, is an exception. I think this particular feud will keep going and will keep going strong, mostly because there aren't many tag teams in the Raw side, in the Raw brand. If Andrade and Garza win it, they are more likely to have face opponents because you have Ricochet and Alexander. However, they've already feuded with the Viking Raiders, for example. We've already seen that. They've already feuded with them and beat them. In addition, the Street Profits already have a clean win over Andrade and Garza. And then the next week they announced they would have a match at SummerSlam for some reason. It's very confusing. Personally, I think the Profits retain, and I think maybe we see a new tag team or a returning tag team taking them on in the near future.
Who would be somebody you'd like to see the Street Profits feud with going forward? If it's a returning team, if it's maybe a call up from NXT, like who do you think would fit that mold?
I would have my eyes on a return for the Authors of Pain, though I don't know the actual return schedule for them, or a call up for Imperium, as in just the two members of Imperium who have been working at NXT. That being Marcel Bartel and Fabian Aichner.
What about Fish and O'Reilly?
I was waiting for that one. We will see. Every time I've mentioned this on other preview shows or just in passing with my friends talking wrestling, they say, oh, you think Undisputed Era has been called up? Honestly, no, I think we're seeing Imperium for now and Undisputed Era later. However, I can't rule it out. Okay, it doesn't look like there's that much left for Adam Cole to do. And certainly, even if they can't convince everyone in the Undisputed Era to come up, you could have, for example, Fish and Strong. Yeah. That's just an example. I'm not saying that O'Reilly does not want to be called up.
Yeah, I think, when they do bring up Undisputed Era, I think it may be kind of a nice way to do. Maybe you bring up, whether it's Fish and O'Reilly, or maybe you do a different combination, Strong and Fish or whatever. maybe bring them up slowly, bring up a tag team first. They have a feud, then maybe you bring in another member, and then eventually you've got all four up there kind of running roughshod on Raw or on SmackDown, as opposed to bringing all four of them in there at once as a stable. So I think that could be a strategy maybe they could use that's a little bit different. I will say, though, the one positive thing of the Street Profits retaining the tag titles is that it gives them a reason to put Montez Ford on television, because I think that guy has star written all over him. He's got charisma out the eyeballs. I mean, so if anything, it makes sure that the writing team gets him on television on a regular basis.
I'm sure they will be doing everything they can to do that. They know a star when they see one. And even just as recently as when Ford started shaking those ropes Ultimate Warrior style in November, you just knew that was getting over.
Well, let's move on to the Universal Championship match. I can't wait to talk to you about this one. I'm definitely looking forward to this match, maybe more so than any other match on the card. Braun Strowman, who now, if you haven't noticed on WWE.com, is actually going by the Monster Braun Strowman. It's an official moniker now, so I don't know if maybe that will play out here in some form or fashion. But the Monster Braun Strowman against the Fiend, Bray Wyatt. I'll let you go first on this one, because I said I'm excited and I feel like I may talk for a little bit on this one. So you tell me first, who's your pick on this match, and how do you see this kind of playing out from a storyline point of view? Because this is definitely the most storyline driven match I think that we have for sure on the card.
The Fiend and Bliss have put together what's become an actually compelling story. And even as recently as a swamp fight, I did not believe that was particularly possible with this feud. We have seen this particular feud going with a month-long break since WrestleMania, since immediately after WrestleMania they started this one going. And it's taken this long just to get the Fiend back on TV, and the Fiend being the guy to actually step in the ring alongside Strowman. Now, we've had this evolution of Strowman. We are seeing Alexa Bliss a lot more involved. But I don't think there's any real question that the Fiend has to be the one taking the championship. Main reason being, there's no one else at the top on SmackDown. In the absence of Reigns, Braun Strowman is only just there by virtue of being champion, and then up here somewhere you've got the Fiend and Roman Reigns. And just a drop, and then a big drop after Strowman. We have to see some change right now because there's no one else for Strowman to face. At least with the Fiend, they'll have some new combinations, and he can feud with Strowman again, potentially down the line, or feud with Reigns when he returns.
So is your pick the Fiend for this match?
My pick is the Fiend Braun Strowman, the Fiend Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, man, I'm going to take a cop out on this one. If I have to pick, I'm going to take a push. I'm going to say that we're not going to have a decision in this match. I think they're going to play off some way. There's a big bump. Maybe Braun, power slams the Fiend through the television, the screen on the entranceway, something where there's just going to be a no contest, no decision, because otherwise I don't know how you could pick a winner in this match, because I think whoever loses, if they have a clean finish, I don't know where that person goes. If you have Braun Strowman drop the title to the Fiend after all this build-up, he has the swamp fight, he comes back with a new look. I said they've given him the moniker. It's an official name now. He's the Monster Braun Strowman. If now you have him lose and the Fiend takes the title, where do you go from there? I mean, you could continue the feud with the Fiend, but that seems like it would just kind of take all the steam off of Braun Strowman at this point. Vice versa, if you have the Fiend take the loss, it feels like we're right back into, Goldberg, Saudi Arabia territory, where if after all this, and as compelling as this television angle has been, if you have the Fiend lose and Braun Strowman beats him clean, what do you do with the Fiend now? He's been taken down. He's been beat clean. And actually, it's the second time that he's been beat clean now. So you send Braun Strowman off as he's the guy. He's the monster. He beat the Fiend. Well, what do you do with Bray now? I guess you could bring him back more full-time as Funhouse Bray, or maybe even, Wyatt family Bray. But I just don't. I think it's compelling, and I don't want to say the WWE's backed themselves into a corner, because I feel like that has a negative connotation, and usually we talk about that when we feel like they put themselves in a negative situation and it's a no-win situation. I feel like this is the reverse. I think it's win-win. I think either way they could go would have positives. I just don't know where they would go with the other competitor. So I feel like the story isn't done yet, and so they're just going to have a no finish and move on. Maybe we have a match at Payback or, the following pay-per-view afterwards.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that Bray Wyatt, in even just in the last 12 months, has been involved in two of the least popular match finishes that I can remember. Hell in a Cell was supposed to be a make or break backed into a corner where the WWE failed, he recovered. Goldberg winning the championship at Saudi Arabia was a make or break, which the WWE failed, and he recovered. It's the strangest thing. He doesn't recover because of WWE booking. If anything, he recovers in spite of WWE booking because he's the Fiend. What I will say, though, is they've already kayfabed the dodgy finish. They've already made it clear how this is going to go, and they've already made sure you know exactly how Braun Strowman or Bray Wyatt in Lost is going to be protected. Alexa Bliss.
Yeah.
That's literally what she's there for.
I would be fine with that. I like Alexa's involvement in this, and we talked about on the last podcast this week about maybe the possibility of even seeing a role reversal of maybe the Fiend ends up as a babyface and Braun Strowman as a heel, and then Alexa's kind of that mystery piece. Which side of the fence does she fall on? Does she end up going with the Fiend? Does she end up going with Braun? And to your point about the WWE putting Bray Wyatt, kind of backing him into a corner, and even though his character continues to recover, like with the Goldberg situation and the Hell in a Cell situation, if I was a WWE, I would caution them on pushing my luck about Bray Wyatt being able to dig himself out of the holes that the WWE creative keeps putting him in. Like, he's done it so far. I think The Fiend is a great character. They need to get this right. Maybe not this specific match, but at the end of this storyline with Braun, when they finally do have a conclusion and they break away from each other, the WWE needs to get it right, because as creative and as great as I think Bray Wyatt is, there's only so many times he's going to be able to save himself from the WWE's missteps. So I hope they don't, kind of screw him over and screw his character up at the end of this. But I think at SummerSlam, I think it's going to be more of a continuation as opposed to a clean finish.
When it comes to digging in holes and essentially Bray having to rescue himself, I couldn't agree more.
Well, let's move on to the next match, which is the debut of Dominik Mysterio against Seth Rollins in a street fight. I'm very surprised that they're putting Dominik Mysterio in this situation. I know that Seth Rollins is probably going to look at it as a challenge to get this kid through his first match, I'm assuming ever. Now, I don't know the whole history of how Dominik's been trained. I assume he's probably had, matches in his training with his father, but obviously it's his first match on television and kind of on the professional level. So it's a tall task for him, but if there's anybody that can lead him through it, I think is definitely up to the task. I think Seth Rollins takes the win here. I think the street fight stipulation is there to kind of help Dominik through, so maybe he doesn't have to do as much wrestling and can do a little bit more brawling and using weapons and things. I think he'll have a strong showing, but I think Rollins will get the win. And I think this is a match, probably more so than any of the others on the card, that I think most lend itself to seeing some type of rematch at Payback, whether it's Dominik Rollins one-on-one again, or maybe we see Dominik and Ray against Seth and Buddy Murphy at the Payback pay-per-view. So I'm taking Seth Rollins in this one. Who you got?
I think you raise a good point as to the advantage of the street fight stipulation, how that sort of gives Dominik a way to cover any green that he still has going into it. I think that's a very fair point and well worth raising. I think the fact that we now know Ray is going to be there, Buddy Murphy's going to be there, it's going to be overbooked, and I don't think people should expect too much. And I do agree we'll see the tag team match at some point in the future. I also agree Seth Rollins is probably the guy to take it. Seth spoke, I think it was yesterday, or depending on when this goes out, potentially the day before, saying that he essentially had a list of possible opponents and he chose Dominik Mysterio to work with. We know some of the people on this list already. Samoa Joe would have been on there. Buddy Murphy himself would have been on there for if they wanted to break up and have their feud, because we saw them tease that as much as anything that we've personally reported. We saw them tease that in the actual episodes of Raw that we've seen recently. The fact that that has happened suggests to me that regardless of who his opponent was going to be, Seth Rollins was going to come out the winner.
Now, we've talked a lot on the podcast, and obviously it's been on social media, about Rey Mysterio signing a new deal with the WWE, which, as far as we know, has not happened. He's more on maybe a kind of a handshake per appearance type of deal. We saw him on Raw this past Monday. Do you think that Rey, because Dominik's his son, if we do get the tag match where it's Dominik and Rey against Rollins and Buddy Murphy or whoever it may be, do you think Rey really needs to sign a new contract, quote unquote, with the WWE to have that match? Or do you think that he would do it just as a favor to Dominik and say, hey, look, I want this match. I think this match will help you get over. We're going to do it. Maybe he wouldn't go as far as saying he'll do it for free, but I don't think he would necessarily need a new long-term deal to do a tag match with his son for a pay-per-view appearance. What are your thoughts on that?
Rey doesn't want to sign a new long-term contract at all. Doesn't matter who it's with, doesn't matter what basis they offer him at. He was considering retirement, and he has been doing so for the last year or so. This was supposed to be, in his mind, his last contract. He was going to retire and was talked out of doing that by Dominik, because Dominik wants to debut and have that tag match before his dad retires. So right now, yes, he's working on a handshake deal, and one of the reasons that WWE are confident that he's not going to run off somewhere else is because they're confident he doesn't want to sign anywhere else. They want him to sign a new contract. He's given them a high price tag because he doesn't want to sign any contracts anywhere. He will happily take this match to support his son without a contract. There is no question about that. There is also a possibility it will be his last.
Let's move on now to the main event. It's for the WWE Championship, Drew McIntyre against Randy Orton. This is another match that I think, no matter which way it goes, you can't pick a wrong way to go here. I think Randy Orton is the hottest heel probably in the business, much less WWE right now. Drew McIntyre, I think, has done a really nice job as the fighting champion since getting the belt from Lesnar at WrestleMania. I think the right call here, and the pick I'm going with, is Randy Orton, because not only because of how hot of a heel he is, but I think because by giving him the win, it continues this feud to eventually allow Drew McIntyre to get the title back, because ever since he beat Lesnar, McIntyre really hasn't had strong contenders for that championship. He's been a fighting champion. We've seen him fight a lot of different people, Bobby Lashley. He gives Heath Slater a shot on Raw. He's fighting Big Show. A lot of different challengers, but no one to really have a feud with. And I think Randy Orton gives him that. It gives him that perfect foil, and it gives him a guy that will legitimize him as a champion if he were to drop it and then he beats him at Survivor or wherever it may be to get it back. And then so you see that to win the championship, McIntyre's now gone through Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton. That's a pretty good list to have on and say, these are the guys that I beat for the WWE Championship. So I've got Randy Orton in this match at SummerSlam with McIntyre getting the belt back down the road. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right that there hasn't been that many big names. I think it would be very powerful to be able to say he has beaten Lesnar, Orton, and of course Rollins, who he faced at Money in the Bank. Those are some great names to beat. However, just like you earlier on had a cop-out with a particular title match, I have a cop-out here, because I think the "you'll never see it coming" tagline responds to the main event, that being this match, interrupted by Retribution and forced to have SummerSlam close early and go to a rematch at Payback. I'm not going to be happy about it, and I'm like you. Regardless of who wins, I would have been happy as long as there's a clean finish, and that is one of many reasons I ain't believing there's going to be a clean finish.
I don't know. I'm old school. Like, I still think pay-per-views should have finishes. There should be some sort of finality to the matches. So I'm hoping that's not the case. I could definitely see that happening. I was even going to ask you about Retribution's role at this show, but I mean, I think they could get that same effect and still have a winner. You could have Drew or Orton win the match and then still have Retribution come out, beat up both men, tear down the set, whatever they want to do, to kind of get them over at the end and still have a finish to that match. So I'm really hoping that maybe they're a little bit more creative than to have Retribution come in and, hey, we get no finish, especially if they go the route of a no contest with the Strowman Fiend match. If you have a no decision in both of your championship matches at your second biggest pay-per-view of the year, again, I'm the TV era where the television shows and things are more important to the WWE right now than the pay-per-views. But like I said, as more of an old school guy, I would just be gutted to think that I spent 2.5 hours of my Sunday night watching SummerSlam just to see the two biggest matches on the card go to a no decision.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed. But when it comes to sending the crowd home happy, it's not something they really think about when the crowd is virtual.
Now, I did want to ask you is kind of the way that Orton has gotten so hot and kind of so quickly. I don't think when we first started talking about SummerSlam matches a month or two ago, this was not a spot that we saw Randy Orton in. I mean, this was, for all intents and purposes, this was supposed to be Drew McIntyre and Brock Lesnar for the championship. And I think if that were the case, I would be picking McIntyre in that match. So if you're Drew and you're looking at that now, instead of going over and getting a second clean win over Brock Lesnar, now you're looking at possibly dropping the championship, and really you're not your first title defense, but I would say this is his first major title defense. Like I said, Randy Orton, no disrespect to Bobby Lashley and Big Show, but Randy Orton is on a different level than those guys when it comes to marquee names. How do you think Drew's feeling about it? I know it's wrestling, I know it's all entertainment, but how do you think he feels about the possibility that, hey, I went from getting a second win over Brock Lesnar to now I may be dropping the title altogether?
Difficult one to gauge, but there's a lot of change going on. Orton has confirmed that he wasn't the first pick for this match. Triple H recently in a conference call confirmed that he wasn't the first pick for this match. It was supposed to be Edge versus Randy Orton for a third time. That was the plan going into SummerSlam. Drew McIntyre was supposed to face Brock Lesnar, but there's no point having Brock Lesnar here when there's no fans. There is no anything. We may see more of Brock Lesnar, but I can't see him reacting particularly well to fans on TV screens. So I just don't think he'll want to come. And as a very talented entertainer, I will say about Brock Lesnar, I think he may be protecting his brand for the right reasons in this particular regard. When it comes to Orton and McIntyre, McIntyre has been very happy to be the WWE champion. He's been very unhappy with the circumstances surrounding it because his whole championship reign has been in front of nobody. And that is horrendous bad luck. But I think if the plan is, as so many are speculating, to have Orton win the championship so that Drew can win it back later, I think Drew will see the merit in that. And I think he'll be excited by that idea.
Yeah, you've mentioned on multiple occasions about the WWE kind of saving big moments because of the fact that there's no crowd. And so they're not going to get that pop and that reaction to that moment. So speaking to that, we've seen how hot of a heel Randy Orton has gotten in a relatively short amount of time. Even if the plan is, okay, we're going to have Orton take the title so he can drop it back to Drew McIntyre. With as hot as Orton is, if he takes the title, what are the chances Orton could take the title and run with it, not only because of how good he is at being a heel, but also because we don't know when fans are getting back in arenas. So if Drew toppling Orton and getting his championship back is going to be one of those big pop moments, if there's no crowd to give him that pop, maybe Drew's looking at a little bit longer hiatus without regaining the championship than maybe was considered. I mean, if we don't have fans back in arenas by November at Survivor Series, maybe it's next WrestleMania before we see Drew get the title, or maybe it's somebody new and Drew McIntyre just kind of gets bypassed by another top babyface on Raw.
One thing I can guarantee is that there will be no WWE Championship match at Survivor Series. Survivor Series will be WWE Champion versus Universal Champion versus NXT Champion at this time, unless there is a major change coming. So like we're hearing lots of rumors about Orton winning and then, oh, Survivor Series. We can't just keep skipping to the next big pay-per-view and assuming that's when the match is going to be. What I will say is it actually doesn't matter if fans do come back or not when it comes to a particular one, because there are so many things being constantly changed. There is already a rumor that Edge, who we know will be returning around the time of the next Royal Rumble, will get a match with Randy Orton, last man standing at WrestleMania. That is heavily rumored. If Randy Orton is the WWE champion going into WrestleMania, Drew McIntyre might not be anywhere near that championship until way after that. And if Edge gets that match and wins that match, Drew McIntyre is going nowhere near Edge for a long time. Edge, with a history of neck issues, is not taking a Claymore. He isn't. A Claymore is a move where essentially Drew McIntyre lines himself up and he can't guarantee where he goes because he has to lean back. He has to. In order to lessen the strength in the kick, he has to lean back, which means he takes his eyes off his opponent. They're not letting that happen. Same reason we won't see Edge versus Brock Lesnar. We won't see it because those German suplexes, who knows? So I can't sit here and guarantee that Drew McIntyre would win the championship again anytime soon if he lost it at SummerSlam or in fact Payback. It's really hard to tell. But at the same time, I don't think there's anyone left for him to face if he keeps it.
And I mean, you talk about, bad luck for a guy that has scratched and clawed his way back just to get back in the WWE, much less be the champion. And then, like you said, he gets the title in front of no fans. There's been no live crowds his entire run. And then if you were to drop it and never even really get back even near the title picture, I mean, that could almost, not necessarily a tragedy, but just a really big stroke of bad luck for a guy that, you really feel for him to see a guy like that and have just kind of circumstances out of his control that they do. And then, he may never not get back to that spot ever again.
Very true. I agree.
Well, a lot to look forward to on SummerSlam. I think it's going to be a good card. And as we've talked about, maybe some of the more interesting things may happen after the fact as opposed to maybe at the event. But we'll be tuning in, and I'm sure you guys will be too. Make sure that you're checking out Sportskeeda.com for all the latest updates leading up to the show. Me and Tom will be talking about all the fallout on next week's Dropkick Discussions podcast. You can also follow Tom over on his YouTube channel and follow him on Twitter at Colohue. If anything late breaking breaks out for SummerSlam, Tom's going to have it, so make sure you're following him on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Korey Gunz if you'd like. And we hope that you enjoy SummerSlam, and we will see you the next time on the Dropkick Discussions podcast and on the next pay-per-view official preview show.